Is there such a thing as a good divorce? I'm going to tell you why there are unhelpful and there are helpful ways to ask and answer that question. Stay tuned. Welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, and these are resources to help you thrive. So this series is on co-parenting after divorce. And if you're new, starting with this video, I do recommend that you go up here. I'll put a link up at the top here and start with the first video and then come forward. I'll also put a link for that video down in the description if you want to watch this video and then go back and start with that video later. But I've been working with thousands of parents for 27 years in a variety of roles as a therapist, mediator, coach, expert witness, author. And I made this series because I wanted to share some helpful information to help you cope with your divorce, to help you co-parent effectively after your separation, and also to help your children cope with their experience of your divorce as well. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about this question of, is there such a thing as a good divorce? And this may sound a little stupid and crazy, but sometimes we need to push the envelope of the questions we're asking in order to find out information that's very helpful to us. And in this case, I think that the common idea about divorce actually sets parents up to not be empowered to cope well and to help their kids cope well. And so let me explain. In the traditional sense, we think about divorce from a religious or a moral perspective. And we think about it also in terms of how we feel about it. And let me say, I'm not poo-pooing religion. I'm not poo-pooing ethics. I'm not poo-pooing being aware of your emotions. But I am saying that when people, though they may not be consciously thinking about it, when people have a sense of, is divorce okay or not, is my divorce going okay or not, there are certain ways that that question can be framed so that it's very unhelpful. And yet I think there is a way to approach the question so that it actually provides some very good information that leads us toward coping better. It leads us in the profession toward a place of being able to support parents in functioning better through and after separation. So the unhelpful ways that this question gets answered, as I said, come from religion and ethics, where basically divorce is just bad, okay? And again, I'm not a member of the clergy, so I'm not giving you theological advice. I'm just saying that if you're a person and you're going through a divorce and you say, this is bad because my preacher preached a sermon and said divorce is bad, or my religion says divorce is bad, where does that land you? Okay. It's a digital A or B thing. Okay. I'm married, I'm not divorced, and things are good. Now I'm divorced and things are bad. Okay. That paradigm does not reveal how it could be better or not so good. It just says not divorcing is good and divorcing is bad. The same with ethical approaches. And also, I think the same with the leftover ideas from Sigmund Freud, which are still dominant in psychology today, that you have this nuclear family of mom, dad, and children. And in that context, children develop. And if mom and dad separate, it represents some sort of crisis, excuse me, for the children. And that's this disruptive crisis that then traumatizes them and thwarts their optimal development into, healthy psychological adulthood, right? So again, if we have this success fail idea, wherever it comes from, religion, ethics, Sigmund Freud, once we're a failure, then what are we going to do? I failed, right? So I can't save it. I can't do it better or worse. It's just I either succeed or I fail. And I think this is the wrong way to approach the question, because if we failed, then that doesn't tell us how we can save it. That doesn't tell us how we can improve it. That doesn't tell us how we can mitigate the negative consequences of whatever's happening, right? And so that leads to victimhood. It leads to a sense of not being empowered. And that's not a great state to be in when you're trying to cope with your separation. It's not a great state to be in as a person attempting to co-parent effectively with your kid's other parent. It's not a great state to be in when you're trying to parent effectively through the divorce and after the divorce, right? Because if you just say, okay, well, I failed, then what that does is it gives you permission to just keep screwing up, okay? And I don't want you to screw up for your own sake and for your kids' sake, okay? So if we want to help people not mess up worse, then we have to ask the question in a way that it actually gets to, could there be a better divorce or a worse divorce, right? Now, people started studying divorce with better research methods several decades ago, especially back in the 80s. So one of the things that changed in the 1980s was the laws changed to no-fault divorce. And as an aside, at that time, people thought, oh my God, you can just waltz into the courthouse and get a divorce without having to justify it morally. And so with no-fault divorce, maybe that's going to just open up some sort of floodgate and everybody's going to get divorced, right? And it started this thing that you've probably heard, which is that half of all marriages end in divorce. This was some research that came out after that. But here's the reality of that statistic. People getting married in the 2000s and beyond are predicted to get divorced at about a 50% rate. But what they don't do is they don't finish the sentence. What that research showed is people are predicted to get divorced at a 50% rate by their 40th wedding anniversary. And another statistic that was discovered at the same time is that more people are actually getting to their 40th wedding anniversaries than before. So marriage is actually not in bad shape. The floodgates weren't open. When no-fault divorce came about, the kind of average number of divorces went up, but it plateaued. So it just reset at a new line, and it's stable, really. So it's not like everybody's getting divorced and nobody's staying married. So that's just an aside. But the question, I think, should be, is there a better divorce and are there worse divorces, right? And as I said, people started studying divorce with better methods back in the 1980s, and so they've been doing this for decades. At this point, there are hundreds and hundreds of studies that have looked at the outcomes of divorce on children. And some of the statistics that were revealed when people started doing this research that are used by the people who are coming at this from the religious angle and the moral angle, which is thou shalt not get divorced. Some people use these statistics from the studies that were done to justify that position. And so they're still maintaining this divorce is bad kind of idea, and they're trying to use these statistics to justify it. But here's a problem. If you look at the actual studies that have looked at the outcomes of children of divorce, and you look at negative consequences that are measured in these studies, such as not doing well in school, having mental health issues, getting involved with the criminal justice system, substance abuse, precocious sexuality, running away from home, poor social development and functioning, however you define what you're going to measure as the negative outcome of how children do after the parents separate, right? It is true that you find that the mean is the average score. So you take a group of subjects in a study and you measure something, and then you add up all the numbers and you divide it by the number of subjects, you get the average score, and we call that the mean. If you compare the kids of divorce and the kids whose parents stay together, yes, you do find different means. Okay, so the average score of whatever you're measuring is going to be different. Okay, and in many of the studies, it is also what we call statistically significantly different, which means we don't think that we're getting a difference in those two numbers by chance. We think that we're actually measuring something and that it is actually different. Okay, but here's the thing that the people who use those studies don't tell you. If you have a study and it measures something, and you're measuring kids whose parents separate and kids whose parents stay together, and you get different scores for the average score of those two groups, the question then is that a practical difference, right? So for example, if you say, well, there's this extremely rare form of cancer and 1 in a million people get it, and we did this study and we found that if you eat such and such a food or you don't eat such and such a food, that you are twice as likely to get that cancer. Okay. Well, if it's 1 in a million at baseline, twice as likely would be 2 in a million. Okay. So that may be statistically significant. It may be a real finding. But the finding is not practically significant because we're still talking about a prevalence rate, an incidence rate of 2 in a million, which still makes it super rare. So would you change your diet if it changed it in that practical sense to 2 in a million from 1 in a million? Probably not, right? Now, if it changed it from 1 in a million to 1 in 10, yeah, that's a practical difference that probably would matter. And you might think about eating more or less of whatever that food is, okay? So this is what I'm talking about. In the studies that have looked at kids whose parents separate and kids whose parents stay together, a lot of the findings were different, but not practically different, right? So if you find that, if parents separate and the kid has an elevated risk of having such and such an outcome, but when you drill down to the practical level, it doesn't actually produce some sort of meaningful difference that would cause us to necessarily think that it's going to matter a lot, right? So that's a lot of the research actually falls into that category. And the people who use those studies to justify their position that divorce is bad don't actually reveal an insightful discussion of the methodology and the actual findings of the studies. They just say kids whose parents divorce are worse along that variable. Okay. However, okay, and this is the substance of why I'm making this video. There are some variables that actually do matter a lot and have a very big impact on how well children do after parents separate versus comparing them to children whose parents stay together, okay? And what I mean by this is that these things really ought to be on our radar as parents, maybe going through a divorce like you, and also as clinicians who work with this population. One of the big ones that is a determinant of the outcome of how well children do after parents separate is whether or not parents are hostile toward each other, whether the parents are fighting, okay? And I'm not talking about hostile as in we just don't agree about everything. I'm talking about yelling, screaming, physical violence, inability to cooperate about children's fundamental needs. And so from a child's perspective, if they are caught in the middle of the parents' conflict, if they have to witness the parents' conflict, they overhear it, they see it from the other end of the soccer field, okay? And they, when they're with one parent, that parent is saying hostile, nasty, angry things about the other parent. Those kids do not do as well as kids whose parents keep them shielded from that hostility, right? That one is significant, okay? The other one that is very significant is children who don't have a good relationship with either parent after the separation, okay? Because what a lot of the research has found is that if a child, after their parents separate, has a good relationship with at least one of the two, then that child tends to do okay. Meaning when you look at all these different outcome issues, they actually look a lot like kids whose parents stayed together, okay? But when you have a kid who does not have a good relationship with either of their parents, those kids look worse when you measure those different variables like academic performance, social development, precocious sexuality, involvement with the criminal justice system, mental health issues, and things like that. So the advice that I glean from this, that I share with you, is that if we're going to ask the question, is there such a thing as a good divorce versus a not good divorce? For me, having read hundreds of studies over the last 27 years and worked with thousands of parents through and after their separation, the answer is you will have a better divorce if you figure out how to keep your kids shielded from witnessing your adversarial parts of your relationship with your child's other parent. And when you do what you can to have a good, attached, nurturing relationship with your child, and when you avoid running interference for your child having a good, healthy, attached, nurturing relationship with their other parent, okay? Those are the two biggest things that I emphasize with parents if you want to have a better divorce, right? Now, again, I don't think it's sufficient to just indict yourself as a failure and say, because I'm a failure, I'm free to just muck it up as much as I want. No, you are responsible to take care of yourself. You're responsible to try to co-parent as effectively as you can. And you're responsible to parent your child and your children as well as you can, okay? And it's not okay, in my mind, for us to just say, well, I've failed, therefore I don't have to evaluate what I'm doing and try to be better because it's a failure. So I can be a total jerk and muck the whole thing up, right? So try, if you can, okay, to think about doing the things that later are going to help your children cope well, but also function well, and also not be exposed to higher risks of negative outcomes. And the two biggest things you can do is have a good relationship with your child, don't run interference for the relationship with the other parent, and also do what you can so that your child is as oblivious to your conflicts as possible, and so that they don't have to directly witness or get caught in the middle of hostility between you and your child's other parent. If you do those things, then you are doing things that are practically significant to actually help your child get along better in their life, right? And in subsequent videos in this series, a lot of what I'm going to share with you are going to help you with those two goals. I'm going to help you learn how to cope well yourself and co-parent effectively with your child's other parent, and also help you help your children to cope well with their divorce. So if you like this kind of content, hit the like button below. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. And thanks for joining me today. I know you've got lots of things to do with your time. I appreciate you joining me in this video, and I'll see you in the next video.